Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to the Acing Your Technical Interview webinar today. So we have Zhia Chong from Twitter here today, who is presenting this wonderful topic for all of us. I know some students are still joining as I speak, but we will get started to be respectful of everyone's time. So as Zia talks about how to prepare for the technical interview, if you have any questions for him, please feel free to type those in the Q&A box. And at the end of the webinar, at the end of the presentation, he will address a lot of those questions for you. So feel free to type those throughout the webinar and we'll be able to address them. So without further ado, Zia, thank you so much for doing this for us, and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Alice. Thank you. First of all, thank you to Alice for having me here and chat with the students and help them prepare for their career and for interviewing that they'll be part of pretty soon. So yeah, let's get started then. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you ace your technical interviews, and this is kind of covering specifically for like if you're trying to get a job as a software engineer, then this topic is basically for you. So quick introduction about myself. So my name is Zhia. I'm a software engineer at Twitter right now, and that's a link to my website if you have kind of follow-up questions or you want to talk to me about anything after this. A little bit about myself. So after I graduated, I kind of went to a startup for a couple of years, and then I joined Twitter about 3 years ago. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to myself. Yeah, so let's get started then. Just a heads up, I'm gonna be kind of talking a little bit on here for about 30 minutes or so, and yeah, feel free to leave questions or anything that you want to discuss on the channel, and then we can kind of discuss. We'll spend about 30 minutes for Q&A after this. Cool. All right, so just to kind of set the expectation here, who is this presentation for? So I think primarily this will be for people who are in computer science or related majors. So data science, engineering, information systems, or if you're in any engineering major with a focus on CS, then this talk will be really relevant to you as well. Or finally, basically anyone who's kind of looking to get into the tech industry for either an internship or a full-time position. Okay, so if you're in any of these buckets, then this presentation is for you. Great. So what we'll be covering today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about myself and talk a little bit about my journey and how I got to where I am today, and what were the steps and what were the things that I did, because very much like yourself, I was a student at one point, and I understand there are a lot of challenges that are really relevant to students. So how I sort of navigated myself around those challenges and how I think those could be applicable to you as you're looking for your job. And then the next session, there will be more specifically, a more technical look at how can you ace your technical interviews as a software engineer. Specifically, I'll talk about what companies look for, and I'll walk you through as well a sample technical interview question both as an interviewer, as an interviewee, what I look for as an interviewer, and then how you can kind of use that knowledge to help you improve your chances of getting a job. Right. Then I'll talk a little bit about the resources that you might need in order to help you prepare. And then the last area here is we're going to save some time for Q&A, 30 minutes of that. Okay. Great. All right, so again, back to my introduction. I think this is a little bit, I think it's relevant because I come from a very similar background to, the current audience here, like students, and you have a lot of interest in getting into computer science. So a little bit about myself. So I went to Gonzaga University, which is, 5 hours driving from University of Washington towards the east side. So I had my undergrad in computer science there. So I spent about 4 years at Gonzaga. And then after graduation, I spent 4 years at a local startup over in Kirkland. And then after that, I spent the last 3 years at Twitter as a software engineer. And the really interesting thing about this whole process is that I wrote this article that kind of went onto the first page of medium.com, which is this awesome website that you can read about articles of people's insights and experience. And it's really awesome. Go check it out. So I wrote this whole experience of how I got into Twitter, and that landed on like the first page of Medium. And I'll talk a little bit about that because I think this is not just like, promoting myself or anything, but I think it's really relevant for any student who's trying to get into the software engineering industry. So that's the title of my article, how I landed offers from Microsoft, Amazon, and Twitter without an Ivy League degree. So if you're interested, you can go check it out and just kind of type in my name or just type in the article on Google and it'll show up. Okay, so basically, here's a little bit about myself. Like the whole story here is that, I didn't have any job offers when I graduated from college, right? So I applied online, but I never actually heard back from any companies. I looked at all the big name companies that you could think of: Microsoft, Facebook, Instagram, like Twitter, like all these different companies out there. I applied to them. I put in my resume. I tried to find people to give me a referral, but I never actually heard back from any of those companies. I basically went on like every single website that you can think of. There's like Indeed.com where you can type in software engineer and look for all the positions that are available. And then there's also something called like, I think Monster.com, but I didn't like, I tried all these different avenues, all these different channels of trying to find a job, but I just couldn't get it, right? Like no one was calling back. I wasn't even getting like interviewing opportunities. It seems to me at the time that, all the effort that I put in just went out into the ocean and like nothing was coming back. So I was feeling obviously very rejected at the time. And here's like a quick application process that a lot of the students online right now might be able to kind of relate with. So the first thing is, right, you find the company website. You look for the company that you're interested in. And then you start to look at, okay, what are the positions or what are the jobs they have available? Then you fill in the application, right? You submit your resume, you submit your application, and then you kind of fall into this like last loop here, which is like this unending cycle of just like waiting, right? You're waiting for people to kind of come back to you, waiting for the results, and it's very unnerving. And you kind of basically take that whole process, rinse and repeat for every single company that you're interested in applying for. So this whole process for one single company, I kind of tracked this at the time as well. It kind of take me anytime from like 30 to 45 minutes just for one company. When you kind of multiply that by all the different companies that you're looking for, you could be applying to like 10, 20, 30, or maybe even like 100 companies all at the same time. Then you can see how that problem becomes worse, right? You're spending 40 minutes per company. You have 100 companies. That's what, 40 times 100, right? So 4,000 minutes that you have to spend just basically kind of managing your whole application. And this is not even talking about the time you're spending interviewing, right? This is just the application process itself. Now, a lot of you might be going through this process right now, and you're thinking, well, how can you do better at this? And for me, that realization came from understanding that this is sort of like this numbers game, right? The problem there isn't necessarily in like my resume or in my ability to do things, but it's more of like, okay, I can apply to all these hundreds and thousands of companies, and all I need is maybe like a 10% conversion or 10% of the companies to call me back and give me this opportunity to interview. And all I need is to get one yes, right? So this becomes an optimization problem where you have to kind of spread out, right? It's just send as many applications as you can get, and basically waiting, to get that one yes from a company. So that's basically my story. And what I did next was I built a web crawler to send my resumes everywhere. So that was my very, computer science, very nerdy approach to solving a problem. And if you're not aware of what a web crawler is basically something like a program that you write that goes out into the internet, and then like it crawls the internet basically and finds these company websites, and then it automatically, figures out if this company is a company that I'm interested in, and then it will put in my resume, and then it'll click that submit button for me. Right. So when you think about this, at the end of it, what happened was that I spent maybe about like a couple of days just building this web crawler, and I would just like automate this. So instead of me going to every single website and putting my resume in, I built this crawler, and then I sent that, set it to start running, and it would just like apply to all these companies out there. And it would compile at the end of it like a single report that has the name of the company that I applied for, the position that was applying for, and also like a status, right? So basically have applied or not. And I would just run that for like multiple days. So I'm just kind of increasing my odds there basically. And so you can see a little bit here. Here's some of the code. I'm not really proud of this code here. I wrote some of that code in I believe this was like 2013, so like 7 years ago. It wasn't the prettiest code, right? I wrote this in Python, and it was really hacky. But you know, I guess everyone's kind of interested in knowing, all right, what are the results of this? You spend some time building this, great. Like, what's the actual outcome? Okay, so I think I don't have the exact numbers that I sent out, but I think I sent over like 500 emails, okay, right, out to all the different companies, basically saying like, hey, I'm interested in this position. I'm interested in this position. Here's my resume and things like that. And I got to 16 on-sites, and I got a job offer from a startup in Kirkland 2 weeks later. Okay, so again, right, I'm just like reiterating here. It's basically like this numbers game where you increase your chances by sending out as many applications as you can, and all you really need is just one yes from a company in order to find the job that you really want. Okay, so that's a little bit about my story. And if you're interested kind of learning more about that, I also wrote like this really long like Medium article about, you know, how I actually built the crawler, what were the libraries that I used, what was the code, what did it look like, things like that. So you can kind of find that on Medium. But yeah, so that's a little bit about myself, and just a little meme that I put in there. Yeah. Okay, just again, I just want to summarize this, right? Opportunities come to those who prepare, right? So if you're just kind of sitting at home on your couch and just kind of like submitting some applications and waiting for people to come back to you, I'll be honest, right? Like in today's job market right now, we're seeing thousands and thousands of students all across the country, all around the world, coming from like top colleges that you can think of, Stanford, University of Washington, MIT, who are really driven and really excited to work on all these different opportunities within these companies. So my advice, you know, to you as you're starting your career is, you know, you want to kind of take that additional extra step, right? You want to do a little bit outside of your regular boundaries. Go outside, meet people, socialize, find opportunities so that you can put yourself out there. And then when the opportunity comes knocking, then you'll be prepared to kind of grab that, right? So that's a little bit my tip here for students out there. All right, great. So with that said, that's my story. So I want to talk a little bit about what interviewers look for in a software engineering interview. So at a high level, here are the 4 things that we are looking for candidates. Number 1, can a candidate code effectively? Number 2, can they resolve ambiguity? Number 3, can they deliver results? And number 4, do they insist on the highest coding standards? And I'll explain a little bit, just a short, brief overview of like what each of them actually means. So the first one, can a candidate code effectively? This, I think a lot of students, if you've had a major in computer science, and you've kind of done some practice with writing code, with using different data structures within the language, then I think this is basically a free pass for a lot of people. I think, you know, especially for new grads, their ability to code effectively, I kind of see that happening quite often. Do you know how to use the best data structures to solve the problem at hand? Are you familiar with the syntax of your language? Are you able to use abstraction, basically taking a concept that is very abstract, that is not easily represented in code, and kind of using classic object-oriented programming to kind of wrap that together and play around with that data in a useful and effective way. So those are the things that we evaluate for when we interview students. The second thing there is, can they resolve ambiguity? A lot of times when you get a technical interview question, it's not going to be given to you verbatim. It's not going to be very straightforward. So what we're testing for with candidates here is that, are they able to ask questions to make sure that they're solving the right problems, right? Do they take the question at face value and implement that? Or do they take the question and then do their own thinking and clarify, ask questions to make sure that the problem that they're solving matches what the interviewer is expecting? Okay. So I think kind of that ties really closely to your actual work as well, because a lot of times when you work with other people, they're not going to give it to you straight, like, okay, solve me this array problem. They're not going to give it to you that way. They're going to say to you something like, hey, I have to solve this X problem. Use your technical skills. How can we solve this? That's typically what more of a real world example of that is. And the third thing here is, can they deliver results? And what this means specifically is that now that you understand the problem, now that you have the coding skills, can you take the problem that I just gave you and then execute on it, right? So I think a lot of students or a lot of candidates kind of fail on this part, right? So they have a lot of technical skills, but they're not able to translate that towards solving the problem at hand. Either they couldn't get to the right communication or understanding of the problem at hand, or they weren't able to translate their concepts into code very quickly and very smoothly. Okay. And the last one here is that, do they insist on the highest coding standards? And this might come as not as natural to a lot of people, but essentially when we're interviewing, we're also looking for, will this person be able to take care of the code, to maintain the hygiene, and make sure that whoever comes after them is going to look at this code and understand what's going on, right? So a lot of times, especially in a coding interview, a lot of kind of candidates just handwrite a bunch of like parameters or coding patterns that are not very ideal for a production code base. And that's something that we look for as well. And a simple sign that or a simple question that we use to poke for this is, we always ask candidates, do you think this is ready for production? Or how would you improve this code? Okay. So usually candidates, they might come back to us and give us this really like blanket statement on like, oh, I will refactor this code, or I will add additional testing. Usually that's probably not the best answer. And the reason it's not the best answer is because it's very hand-wavy and it's very ambiguous. What I think would generally be a better answer to this question is having very specific perspective on where you think the improvements should come from. An example here is, if you're suggesting that you should rewrite the code, make sure you're very explicit about which part of the code that you're going to rewrite and what the structure of that code is going to look like. You don't have to write the actual code to it, but being able to suggest that and back it up with proof and explain in the long term how that code would work, I think that's a really strong sign that a lot of interviewers really appreciate and really look for. Okay, so that's a high level sort of explanation of the 4 things that interviewers are looking for in a coding interview. Now, contrary to a lot of what people say online, they're saying like, okay, this coding interview is just like this quiz, right? It's either you know it or you don't. In my opinion, I think the best interviewers take this in a different direction. For me, not saying I'm a really good interviewer, but we have internal training here basically just saying like, okay, don't ask questions where it's only a yes or no sort of solution. There are usually multiple different solutions to a problem. And what we're looking for really is the candidate's ability to think on their feet and come up with the solution and also kind of execute on all these 4 different dimensions. Okay, cool. All right, next. So again, just kind of summarizing, I think here are some of like the more common good and bad areas that I see from candidates. Usually a good candidates are going to do the following. One, they're going to ask clarifying questions. Understanding what's the problem being given to them. Is it an array? Is it a list? Are those like integers? Are those doubles, floats, things like that? The second thing is brainstorming out loud. So I see a lot of candidates kind of, they kind of get shut in their own little bubble. And it's very hard to get thoughts out of them. So understanding basically how they're thinking about problems or where they're being stuck on. So where I see good candidates are the candidates where they're able to talk out loud where their thinking process sits. Are they thinking about the solution? Are they thinking about areas that might be problematic? Basically just kind of talking through your thinking process. I think that's where generally good candidates are. Third thing, writing your code slowly and carefully. I think some of the best candidates I see, once they come up with the solution for the problem, they're gonna take their time, being very methodical about writing their code, picking a good parameter name, picking a good structure for their functions. Right? No one's really evaluating you based on how quickly you write your code. What we are evaluating is basically, are you able to write clean, readable, and code that solves the problem? So basically the correctness of the code. The fourth thing here is think about issues preemptively. So think of issues that might happen in your code. Think about the code cleanliness and about the hygiene of the code itself. And also the last part here is being mindful of the code structure. Example here is that if you're writing some function to do something, in writing code, there's a trick that you can use, which is you can initialize another function or a helper function. That's what we call it, a helper function to help you do some of those nitty-gritty things. So some of the very best candidates I've seen are very, very thoughtful about this. So they use helper functions all the time to help them write their code. Okay, now moving into like the bad side of coding, jumping into implementation right away. That's really, really bad. I don't like that. I don't think that works really well for candidates. Second thing, no proof of work, i.e. how did you get to this solution? I mean, like if you're in college right now and you're in any STEM class, you have to show steps, right? How did you get to the solution? And for a lot of really good candidates, they're able to kind of show step by step, right? What were the steps that they took? What were the decisions that they had to make? What were the pivots, right? Maybe you saw like, okay, this one solution wouldn't work. Let me pivot to something else that might work, and kind of showing their proof behind that. Okay. And then the third one here is like, I see a lot of kind of candidates think of a solution first, and then try to fit the problem into the solution. That's why I call like putting the cart before the horse. Usually what happens here is that like they're given a problem and they try to figure out, okay, what are some different data structures or algorithms that I've seen or I've used that might be a relevant fit to this problem at hand? And instead of kind of working back, that's sort of like backwards, right? You're thinking of the solution before the problem rather than understanding what is the actual problem that you're trying to solve, and then figure out, okay, how am I going to solve this problem? Right. So yeah, so those are some of the things I think you should be careful of if you're going through this interviewing process. Okay, so now let's kind of jump into a simple technical question that I like to use, and we can kind of step through it step by step together. So the prompt here is basically, okay, find the top k numbers in a given list. That's the technical question. So this is something that you should expect either from a phone interview or maybe from an on-site. So the interviewer is going to be on one side of the table, and they're going to give you this question, and now's your time to shine. How would you solve this? Okay. So step one, what I recommend doing as a candidate here is that you want to ask clarifying questions. Okay, so this question by itself right now, it's actually very ambiguous, right? There are a lot of things that are not given within this prompt, right? first thing you might want to clarify is, what is top k? Is that the most frequently occurring numbers? Is that the biggest number? Is that the smallest number? What does top k actually mean? Then another question that you might have is, what is a list? Is it a specific type of data structure? Is it a linked list? Is it an array? You might also ask, do we know the range of numbers? Is that from 0 to 10? Is that from 0 to a million? Like, what is the actual range that we're operating in? Another question that you might ask here is that, can the numbers fit in a single machine? Or do we have to handle this using multiple different machines? Okay, so after you're done asking those clarifying questions, what actually happens here is that, okay, you're gonna have a bunch of assumptions about this question itself. And I implore you to be very explicit about these assumptions that you're making. Okay, so again, to those questions, you might get some answers from the interviewer. They might say, yes, top k, that's a great question. Top k is gonna be all the top biggest numbers in the list. The second question, what is the list? So they might say, an array of numbers. To your question, do we know the range of numbers? And the interviewer might say, yes, it's the range of valid integers. Okay. And the final question, like, can the numbers fit in a single machine? Yes, we can fit everything within a single machine. So now it makes the question much more clear, right? Because now you kind of understand what is the scope and what are the constraints of the problem itself. So that's kind of what I meant by, asking clarifying questions, and understanding what is the scope of the problem that you're trying to solve. Bad candidates in this case would see this problem and then try to jump to, okay, finding a solution right away, maybe sorting it or maybe doing something with it. But a good candidate would have taken those first two steps, asking questions, voicing out the assumptions, before moving on to the third step, which is, well, I'm just kind of formalizing the input here. So this input looks like this. You're given an array of numbers, and you're given k, which is 3 in this case. And the output here is you want to find the 3 largest. So 5, 4, 3. Those are the 3 biggest numbers in the list. Great. So now you've kind of understood what the problem is. Now you want to move on to the third step, which is brainstorm, providing solutions to the problem. And a lot of candidates, I think it's perfectly fine to start with brute force as a starting point if needed. Okay, a lot of students might think, oh, I have to get to the most ideal or the most optimized solution right away. But that's actually not the case. It's perfectly fine, right? Start from a reasonable solution, even if it is not very efficient, even if it is brute force. It's perfectly fine. Start there. Start somewhere where you have a solution, and then incrementally provide solutions or provide improvements on top of the solution itself. Right? Now, use examples to make sure that you understand the problem. And then, okay, so once we have that, so one possible solution that you have here is that, okay, sort all the numbers and then get the last k elements. Right? I think that's a very simple solution. It's very easy to understand. And essentially what happens there is that you're going to end up with a n log n time complexity solution, because sorting a list is going to take like n log n complexity. This is just like all computer science-y stuff. But it's not the most ideal solution right away, because there are some issues with this solution. Oh, I don't know why I didn't include that. Okay, anyway, so using that as a first brute force approach, I'm going to talk about, okay, how you can iterate and improve on this. There are some problems with that initial approach. Okay, so back to that solution, which was sort and get the last k elements. The time complexity is n log n, which is not terrible. But the problem here is, you're incurring a lot of overhead if your k is very small. What I mean by that is, for example, if I only need to get the top 3 out of millions and millions of elements, or millions and millions of numbers, right? You don't need to sort the entire thing just to get your top 3 numbers. So in this case, this would have been an overkill. Okay? And the other problem here is that there's no guarantee of uniqueness. So again, using that initial example, if I had 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, I had multiple 5s in there. Do I return 1 5 or do I return, 3 5s? Okay. So ideally, what I want to do is I don't care about those duplicates. I only care about the biggest numbers, so to speak. Okay? If I use this solution right here, then I wouldn't be able to get that guarantee of uniqueness. Okay? So again, using this example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4. If I want to return top 3, it would just return 4, 4, 4. Now, okay, so we have our initial approach. Now we've added a new kind of requirement or understanding of the problem here. So let's come up with a different approach to solve those problems. Now, you might say, okay, different approach here is that we want to keep a counter of integer to frequency and then sort the frequency, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Basically what this does is that it will help you get rid of all the duplicates. So instead of having this array, you're going to keep a counter of number to the frequency itself, and then you just sort them, and then get the top 3 highest occurring frequency based on that counter. And this, again, this makes sense. The time complexity is going to be O of n log n. It does great if you have a lot of duplicates, but the downside here is you're going to need a lot more space, right? Because again, you have to keep this counter, and you need to kind of, the worst case here is every single element is unique, then you have another like O of n space just to store everything. Not very ideal. Again, right? Using that same process again, let's iterate, let's kind of improve. We've kind of seen step by step, okay, what the solution looks like, what the problems are. Let's kind of improve on top of that. And the solution I would propose here is that you have something called like a heap data structure, right? So a mean heap specifically, where you have the smallest number guaranteed at the top of the heap, and every child has this, well, I'm not going to explain too much what this heap data structure is, but you can kind of look it up online later on. But what we're going to do here is that we're going to rely on this data structure called heap to help us solve this problem in a very, very efficient way. Okay, so what I think is ideal here is, one, we can remove the duplicates using a hash set. So again, this is going to use a lot of space, but it's fine because in order to remove those duplicates, this is something that we need to do. But we can improve on the initial time complexity. So instead of sorting everything, we can use a mean heap of size k, and then basically just kind of keep this bag of k elements, top k all the time. And we just kind of have this bag, and then check for every single element within the array, does it fit into our image of like this top k? Okay. So again, the time complexity here would have been improved. It would have been improved from n log n to n log k. Okay. So again, if your n is really, really large and your k is very small, then this would have done a lot better compared to your initial sorting algorithm. Okay. So it would remove all the duplicates. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4 now becomes 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you want to get the top k elements, you keep a mean heap of size 3. So what it'll do is it'll keep 1, 2, 3 in the bag, and then when it sees 4, it's gonna kick out 1, and then put 4 into your heap. So at the end of it, you're gonna get 4, 3, and 2, and that solves the problem. Okay, all right. So basically, that's a quick, simple overview of how a technical coding interview would go, and those are some of the things that I would have wanted to see in a good candidate, and basically kind of stepping through their thought process one by one. What's their solution? What are the constraints? How do we fix them? And keep iterating. So if you're able to kind of get to this solution here and able to step through each of those solutions in the way that I described earlier, then yes, that would have been a great candidate. Okay, so now, like, if you're interested in any of this other stuff, I'm including some resources for the reading. Practice programming, go to LeetCode, go to Project Euler. For additional reading, you can go to DailyCodingProblem.com, which I think is really useful. It's a daily newsletter of different programming problems that they send to your email every single day. So I found that kind of useful when I was preparing for coding interviews. Elements of Programming Interviews, that's another great book that I highly, highly recommend on Amazon.com that you can buy. It covers a wide range of different problems that helps you prepare and understand how to tackle programming problems. And self-plug, I write very frequently on medium.com, and I run a YouTube channel where I talk about programming. You can find me basically anywhere on the internet. Just type like Zhia Chong and you can find me. So yeah, so those are all the slides that I have, and hopefully I'm right on time. So I think I'm a little bit like 5 minutes, 6 minutes over, but yeah, open to Q&A right now.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. Thank you, Zia, for going over all these for us. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we can start addressing them. This is a great way, for you to ask questions and pick Zia's brain about things. So, okay. So the first question, is it possible to obtain these slides? Yes. So we have recorded it. The recording and making it ready to distribute is taking much longer. So if you want to access the slides only, because that will be faster, do let me know. The recording will also be available at a later date. But if you want to see the content, let me know. You can email me at alice.yk@uw.edu and let me know, and I'll be able to share the slides with you. The second question, for CS majors, would it be better to graduate with an internship experience even if it will postpone the graduation? What are your thoughts on that, Zia?
Yeah, ideally is to get your internship and graduate on time. I think it's like the ideal situation, but I think it depends on the situation, right? Like why do you need to push out and postpone your graduation? Is it because you're going to spend more time doing internship, therefore it's going to push back your graduation? Or is that because of, what other circumstances that you might have? And I think generally, in my opinion, is that students who have had more internship experience tend to do a little bit better, right, in terms of like job application. And the reason there is because one, they have had some industry experience through those internship opportunities, and two, based on either like the projects that I've worked on or the companies that they've worked on, we can kind of like pattern match what students would match really well to the opportunities that we have within the company, right? So I think the high level summary I would say here is that ideally don't postpone your graduation because additional college is you're gonna pay more for that and things like that. But short of that, then figuring out for yourself if the internship opportunity is going to give you a lot of learning opportunities there. Are you going to learn a lot from that? What are the things that you're going to learn from that, right? And then after you make that decision for yourself, if you think that, yes, I'm going to learn a lot from this internship, and yes, the experience is going to be very relevant to my opportunities in the future, then I think it makes sense to kind of make that jump and say, okay, I need to kind of postpone my graduation. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, thank you for your insight on that. So the next question here, as an electrical engineering student, I haven't used that many programming languages compared to CS students. What are the fundamental skills that an entry-level software engineer should have to ace the interview? Also, what are the programming languages companies prefer entry-level engineers to possess?
So can you repeat the second part of the question?
Right. Yeah, it is a long question. So the questions, I guess, essentially, what are the fundamental skills that an entry-level software engineers should have to ace the interview? The second part, what are the programming languages companies prefer entry-level engineers to possess?
Okay. I can answer the second part first because that's a lot easier to answer. Generally, there's no preference on what sort of language that you use. You can use Python, you can use Java, you can use C++. There's no general preference for any of them. The only thing I might say here is that you want to pick a programming language that is very commonly used. Like Java is good, JavaScript is good, Python is good. I would generally kind of stay away from the more obscure type of programming languages, like maybe Haskell, or maybe something like, I don't know, there are tons of different programming languages out there. So you want to stay away from those because it's sometimes a little bit harder to explain to the interviewer what you're doing. So I would generally recommend something that's more commonly used: Python, Java, JavaScript. All of those are perfectly fine, just as long as you can explain your thought process in them. And back to your first question, there is, what are the skills that we are evaluating for to be a good fit? So even if you're not a computer science major, I think there are some skill sets that you need to prepare. One is ability to write code, right? That's a non-negotiable. That's a fundamental thing that everyone who interviews for being a software engineer needs to have, right? It's either you know how to use your data structures, you know the right syntax, you understand the trade-off between a depth first search versus breadth first search, things like that, right? Those are the non-negotiables. The second thing is, you need to have a very solid understanding of data structures and algorithms. And again, that's a non-negotiable. We're going to ask those questions over and over and over again. And we're going to probe you pretty deeply on, do you understand what's the trade-off between using a linked list versus an array? Do you know what's the trade-off between using a hash map versus a hash set? Things like that. We want to make sure that your fundamentals are strong, right? There's no free pass if you can't answer those questions. Like, as an example, if you're not very familiar with what a binary tree versus a binary search tree and what the performance characteristics of those data structures are, you're not going to do well on any of these interviews, right? There's no free pass, basically. So essentially, those are the fundamentals that we look for in software engineers.
Great, thank you. Next question, hi Zhia. What part of the interview are coding questions like the one that you had given an example of? And what part is talking about your previous project experience?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it generally depends on the company itself, how they want to structure it. Generally, what I see is that companies have several rounds where they have one round that's specifically technical, where it's coding questions just like what we saw there. And then there's another round which is called like behavioral round, where the hiring manager is going to sit down with you and just kind of talk through what are the projects that you worked on, what are the things that you like, what are the things that you don't really like. Yeah, so I think generally that's the style of how we do it. And sometimes also if the technical portion goes really well, the interviewer might just spend the rest of like the 20 or 30 minutes, whatever, and just talk to you about, what are some projects that you work on in the past, just to gauge what is your interest level, what are the things that excite you, right? Because again, at the end of the day, it's going to be a two-way traffic. It's both an opportunity for the company to evaluate, are you a good fit? And it's also for a time for you to understand whether this company is a company that excites you, right? So I would again recommend use those sessions to not only answer questions that they're throwing at you, but also throw questions back at them, because there's so many different companies out there. The culture of the company is very different. Some is gonna really align with your own values, or some of them are gonna be really interesting to you. And some of them on the outside might seem really interesting, but maybe on the inside it's not done really well. So you want to take that opportunity to evaluate and understand what's going on. So make sure that you kind of have a good understanding of the risks or of the trade-offs that you're making as you kind of head into that company. Yeah. Cool. Sorry. Are there follow-up questions?
Oh, sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
I was on mute. I was actually reading off the question and realized.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, how do you handle a situation where you don't know how to solve the problem?
Yeah, I think that's a very broad conversation that we can have, like maybe like not within this scope, but just some tips here. Um, if you don't know right away what the solution looks like, it's perfectly fine, right? Don't give yourself that pressure that you should know what the solution looks like right away. That's where I recommend asking questions to make sure that you fully understand what the problem's about, right? And then coming up with different examples, just kind of step through it, right? Step through the examples and kind of see, okay, can you recognize some sort of pattern in those questions, right? Maybe there's some patterns for solving it that you had not seen before, but after spending 5 to 10 minutes, it slowly comes to you, right? And it's also very important to use your interviewer in this scenario to ask them like, hey, this is my thinking process right now. Here's where I'm being stuck on. Can you help me? Or can you give me some tips to unblock myself? Okay? Because at the end of it, right, nothing's worse than both of you just standing there and not getting anywhere, right? Our goal is to kind of give you some simple tests, but it's also our mission to help you succeed, right? So use us, ask us questions. If you think that you're blocked, it's fine, right? Make sure that you're making progress all the time. I've had candidates in the past where they didn't solve the entire problem within 40 minutes or 60 minutes, but they still ended up getting the job because I can see that they're actively engaging the problem, trying to solve it and tackling it from different perspectives. That's what we really want to see, right? We want to see people who are engaged. They're thinking about the problem and they are not easily giving up just because it's a problem that they haven't seen. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Good. No, I think it does. Thank you. Speaking on behalf of the student, obviously. So the next question, I think, is a follow-up to that question, actually. So if you have a hard time coming up with algorithms or solution, is there a good way to approach these coding problems? Is it a matter of repetition to improve your problem-solving problems? So I guess the student is asking how to improve that problem-solving skills.
Yeah. So several tips that I can recommend here is that one, of course, you have to do your practice, right? Practice makes perfect. Spend your time going through those questions and make sure you have a good breadth of understanding what those different problems are. And it's not that many. Like if you really take your time and kind of go through them, it's probably around like 2-3 weeks of preparation, of looking at those problems. So that's one part, right? Practice makes perfect. And the second part there is around how do you get better at problem solving? To that, I would say really challenge yourself and challenge your assumptions that you make in those problems that you're solving. Because a lot of times in an actual interviewing session, usually there are layers to the problem, and the first layer is generally pretty straightforward, right? A lot of people can solve those problems. It's not very, very tricky. It's not very problematic. What happens is that we're gonna slowly unveil layers by layers by layers that makes it a little bit trickier, a little bit more difficult. And a lot of people get tripped up on this because they're not used to this mode of solving increasing layers of complexity. And if you're just going on LeetCode and you're solving problems on there, you're not gonna be able to get this type of practice. So what I recommend doing here is that take time to look back on some of the LeetCode problems that you're given and try to impose some sort of additional constraints on them to see if you can still make progress or solve them. Like an example there, like if we use the previous question, top K numbers, now we had a bunch of assumptions there, right? We had all the numbers fitting in the single machine. We had an array of numbers. Now, what if we change that a little bit, right? What if we change this, instead of a array, we change this into a linked list? What if instead of numbers, they're characters or strings? What if instead of a single machine, now we have tons and tons of machine distributed everywhere, and I want you to find the top K, right? So those are exercises that I would recommend doing. You add more complexity, more layers on top of the problem that you're solving, And that is really gonna get your problem solving skills polished.
Great. We have a couple more questions here. So for people who don't have an internship experience, what do you think full-time candidates or candidates who are looking for full-time positions should prepare for to stand out?
Yes, great question. I think, in my opinion, um, I think there are several things that you can do. One is that, why don't you have an internship experience, right? Is it because that you haven't spent time to find those internship experience? If you didn't say, that's a terrible answer, right? Because I'm being very truthful here because I want you guys to succeed, right? And finding those internship opportunities are not very difficult these days. You go on Craigslist, go on any website looking for internship, or even just be like a free volunteer for a local startup. And especially if you're somewhere in University of Washington, there are tons and tons of startups today, or even like reach out to me. I have tons of people starting startups today who would love a helping hand. So, one is find out why you don't have that internship experience and figure out how you can solve that. That's the first one. And short of that, maybe because of your situation or because of the environment that you're in that didn't put you in that opportunity to succeed, to find those opportunities, then what you could do next is that there are a lot of tutorials online these days for building products, for building different things. So, using an example, like I didn't have like a really strong internship experience because I was a Division I college athlete. So I didn't have a lot of time to do those things, but I didn't let that stand in my way of having some sort of like project experience. So what I did was, I put that crawler project that I did and kind of put that on my resume. And it did several things for me. One, it helped me understand like how web crawlers work. So that's like a really interesting project for myself. Two, it put this really interesting project experience on my resume, which caught a lot of people's eyes, right? And three, it gives me this opportunity to have very intelligent, very in-depth discussions with interviewers, right? Because now you have something that's not just academic, right? You're not just talking about how you build a hash table in class. You're actually doing something outside of class that is aligned with your passion, that is something that you did on your own spare time, and something that you saw very concrete results of. So when you take that experience and you go to an interviewing session, you're able to kind of talk about a lot of these things, and it turns into this really interesting, really fun time that's not just you being grilled on like, can you solve this? Can you solve this? It becomes this back and forth. You're like, oh, this is a product that I built. And then they're genuinely very interested in how you built it. And then you guys can kind of talk as peers, basically just kind of discussing what are the trade-offs that you made, what are some product decisions that you had to make, what were the results of it, and what are some other things that you might potentially try in the future. And yeah, I can go on and on about this whole conversation, but I think at a high level here, those are some of the things I would recommend. One, find the opportunities out there. There are tons of them. And two, if you can't find those opportunities, then create your own. Build your own project, build your own, whatever that you have to build, just do it. Get your hands dirty. Yeah. Sorry, Alice, you're muted. Are you saying anything?
I am. I'm so sorry. I'm muting myself in between your questions and I keep forgetting to unmute myself. So this question I was reading up, I'll start from the beginning. I'm pivoting my career from a different field related to the previous questions. What do you suggest of doing to add to portfolio? How could I use Medium to add to portfolio? Have read some articles, but not sure what to write or how to contribute.
Do you say medium?
Yeah.
What sort of medium you need in order to pivot?
I'm not sure. So how could I use Medium to add to portfolio? That was the student's question. My career from a different field related to portfolio. So I guess, kind of on a kind of spinning this off with another question that's here. So, and this student who had written this question, if you have any clarification to add to it, please do. But while that's coming through, so, what are some of the things that students can do on a personal level? So not a, school project or internships, but some personal projects that they can add to either their resume or portfolio.
Yeah. If this is like suggestion on very specific concrete projects that they can work on, then I think there are tons and tons of different projects that are available online. Like building a simple web crawler is a good example. Building a simple API or maybe like a dictionary or a diary application, or even kind of building like an e-commerce website if you want to, right? Where you can put products on there, people can like add them to their cart, check out, things like that. I think the opportunities here are endless. There are a lot of different projects that you can take on. There's no really anything that I would say it's good or bad project. It's basically whatever that you feel interesting to you, and just start doing that, right? Think of whatever problem space that you're interested in and start kind of looking into that. Maybe it's an app, or maybe it's a game, or maybe it's some sort of, whatever that you have, right? Just get your hands dirty and start thinking about what excites you and start building from there. Yeah.
Great, thank you. The student's saying medium.com, and I'm assuming it's a website that you can access some articles. Is that something that, Zhia, you're familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I write on medium.com quite a bit. It's basically like just this website that has a collection of articles from different people within like different walks of life, where they can submit their experience or their learnings or how they did certain things. Yes, but I wasn't very sure what was the context of medium.com to pivoting to a different career.
Yeah, I think the student was asking how she can better use the medium.com to work on things to add to portfolio that she or he has.
I see.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, in that case, I would say, I think it's not a requirement today. So basically, I'll just kind of rephrase the question the way I understand it. Basically, the question here is that how can I use medium.com or any other type of social media to present my portfolio, right? If that's the question, then my answer here is that you don't necessarily need to focus on the social media aspect of it, right? Just focus on your own project first and foremost. Focus on the content, the problem space that you're interested in. Once you have good content and once you have interesting projects that you're able to show, then take that next step, which is getting more people to be aware of the projects that you're working on. So whatever that is, it's just an extension of marketing, right? You can go on medium.com, you can go on LinkedIn, you can go on Twitter, basically kind of letting people know, here are the things I've worked on, here's what interesting, get some feedback on that, right? So in my personal opinion, I've kind of touched a little bit on this like different social media spaces to get more sort of like awareness of the things I'm working on. And in my opinion, I think every platform has its own pros and cons. It caters to a very different kind of audience on all of these different platforms. So unless you have something that you think is ready to share, or something that you feel you want to get feedback on, I would say like not worrying too much about those aspects for now, and just focus specifically on what are the projects that you're working on, getting it out the door, and then after that, start collecting feedback from people.
Great. Thank you so much for, kind of rewording that also for other students as well. I do have one last question really quickly. You can make the answer really short and we'll make that a last question. It is the last question. So what's your opinion about front-end work? In college, the courses are heavily relied on back-end. And a lot of times students need to learn front-end work on their own. What's the job market like these days? Do employers want more front-end people or back-end people?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as well. And I think that kind of touches a little bit on more of like the trend over time. And I mean, I'm not like a very good authority to comment on this because I don't understand like the market that way. But generally, I think from what I've seen is that from a individual perspective, if you have to choose between working on front end, if you have to choose between working on front end or back end, what I recommend doing here is that, one, understand where your interests and passions are, right? Because don't let the market necessarily dictate the skills that you're trying to pick up. What I think is most important here is that understanding what are the things that you're very passionate about, and just do that, right? That could be either front end or that could be back end. And I think there's going to be market either way for people who are good in those areas. You could be a really good front end engineer. There's a market for that. You could be a really great back end engineer. There's also a market for that, right? So in terms of market direction, it's hard to say if it's going to tip one or the other. But what I can say is that if you know that you have some passion for front end development, then go ahead, do that, right? Because what I find is that generally when you're doing this sort of like hard technical areas, your passion is going to carry you forward. It's going to push you to learn and challenge yourself in ways that you couldn't otherwise in a different, like say like a backend perspective. So I think that's really important, because once you're able to kind of use that passion to drive yourself, to push yourself a little bit further, it's going to make you into this really unique individual with a very unique set of skills. And there's always going to be a market for people that way.
Great.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you, Zia. I think that's a really strong way to end this webinar. Find your passion and stick to that, and then prepare yourself. So thank you so much, Zia, for leading this webinar and answering all of the questions that students had. We really appreciate your time. And thank you everyone who joined in today and asking lots of questions and making this interactive webinar. So again, if you want access to the slide deck or the recording, let me know, and I'll eventually be able to get those to you. But otherwise, thank you, Zia, again so much. People do connect with him. He offered it, so do connect with him and check out the resources that he has on his sites. Yeah, so have a great evening, everyone, and hopefully you can join more webinars in the future. We have some more coming up, so check out the calendar for those. And thank you again for all of your time, Zia, and hopefully you can join us in the future again too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Alice. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.